Welcome to the Lowe Post podcast on a beautiful Friday morning on the East Coast, where it's time to talk about the stretch run at the bottom and the upcoming draft lottery, which we're only 2.5 months away from, a draft lottery that could change the whole landscape of the league. And there are 4 teams that have really separated themselves at the bottom. Congratulations to those 4 teams for really separating themselves at the bottom from everybody else. And nobody knows the draft better than world traveler in gyms that like Adam Sandler's in with Boban at the beginning of Hustle. Jonathan Givony, how are you, sir?
I'm great, Zach. How are you?
What was the last country you were in?
France, which makes a lot of sense, right? I spent a week with Brian Windhorst in Paris. We were working on story, which some people read last week, and there's a lot more coming. Also a TV feature. So we got a lot of great content on Victor. Got to spend a lot of time with him, with his family. It was amazing.
You know what? Let's just start there. I was going to start with the mess in Atlanta. I don't want to talk about the mess in Atlanta right now. We can do that later. Hawks, cawing around. What did you learn about Wembanyama? Your story posted last week. I read it. I think the general, for those who don't have Insider or didn't read it, I think
it was free.
It was free. Oh, well, then you have no excuse, people. Reading. It's fundamental. I think the general takeaway I got as someone who's never interacted with him before, I know his agents a little bit, was the idea that he is really trying to close off his circle, focus on basketball, focus on playing for a team that is really built around just preparing him for the NBA and happens to be winning anyway, turning down a lot of financial opportunities, a lot of sponsorship opportunities. And I think the takeaway was supposed to be, I think, this guy's a serious basketball player who's taking this very seriously, who's trying to prepare his mind, his body, sleeping 11 hours a night, which makes me so jealous whenever I read about people who are told to sleep 11 hours a night, preparing himself in a very serious way for the NBA. Did any of that surprise you? What else did you learn about this phenom, the most important prospect since LeBron probably, that you didn't know and maybe didn't even make the story when you went to France?
Yeah, well, he's been very sheltered from a very early age, and that's by design. His parents are not huge fans of all the attention that he's receiving, especially now. They vented to us pretty well about just how hard it is for him to leave his house and how intrusive people are. They're so rude. Everyone wants to take selfies with him. And but if Victor actually loves it, and so, but he's open to it. I just, what struck me about him is how interesting of a person he is. He's kind of like an old soul in a lot of ways. He's into classical music. He likes drawing. He's into poetry. He really loves art. And he's got a real plan in his mind for how things are going to go for him in the NBA. And his agents, they make suggestions and they have advice, but at the end of the day, he's his own man. And that's, you don't really see that a lot from a 19-year-old. But at the same time, they've done a great job with just positioning him and managing him and making sure that every aspect of his life is taken care of, and that he, like you said, can really fully focus on basketball and being the best basketball player that he can be. And, just with the physical therapist that works with him on a day-to-day basis, twice a day sometimes, and all the, the work that he's putting on his body. And I think that, he's probably the most micromanaged prospect that I've seen. I mean, he's basically in the NBA already, even though he's in France. I mean, he's living that lifestyle, not just like the glitz and the glamour, but just in terms of how serious he is about his craft, and how much they're focused on making sure that he has the best chance possible to be one of the best players of all time, which that's their goal. They'll tell you that straight up.
In watching the little I've watched of him, games, highlights, I'm almost more excited about the defense than the offense. This guy is blocking shots like out of nowhere. and not doing crazy out of rotation things to do it. And, it just looks ridiculous. And I think he's going to walk in the league and be a very good player right away, which is rare. In watching him and talking to NBA people who have watched him a lot, what's changed about his game in the last 4 or 5 months? Is there any area that he's gotten better at noticeably that you hear people talking about?
It depends. I asked Victor the same question because a lot of the criticism that you heard about him early in his career, people would say like he's not aggressive and he needs to get tougher. And you hear that a lot about young big men, especially really skinny ones. Like he had a tendency to kind of float from the 3-point line to the 3-point line, not box out, not rebound, just settle for jumpers, and kind of fade in and out of games sometimes. Like you watch him. Like at this, there's the Adidas Next Generation tournament that he played in 2 years ago. And he put up great numbers. He's always going to put up great numbers, but he didn't really dominate the game the way that you expected. And then comes these G League Ignite games in October. And it was like, holy cow, I haven't seen a more aggressive player in my life. I mean, he just came out to dominate. He was asserting himself on both ends of the floor. There's no questions anymore about the aggressiveness, the toughness. I mean, he's really grown into that. And Victor would say, that he needs to be put in that situation where he's being utilized to be aggressive and given that freedom, and that he hasn't always had that opportunity at different points in his career to really express himself and bring that out of him in terms of being a guy who, is given the freedom to create his own shot, to shoot off the dribble, to pass off a live dribble, and to do all those things. And so, that's part of it, is the situation that he's been put in, which is an absolute perfect situation for him. Handpicked coach, handpicked roster. The whole show is about him, but he's taken that and shown that he can win. I mean, they're in second place in France right now. He's far and away the leading candidate for MVP. He's leading the league in scoring and rebounds and blocks, and he's doing it in a very efficient way. So, and there's still so much room to grow there, not just physically, but also, with his passing ability, his ability to use his left hand. He's not a finished product by any means. So, and that's it's exciting, because you talk to him off the court and you're like, this guy is incredibly intelligent. And then you watch him play and you're like, holy cow, this guy is not only incredibly gifted talent-wise, but he's so smart. His feel for the game is off the charts. And when you talked about defensively, that's where it really shows up the most right now.
Is there any concern that front office evaluators have about him other than the concern that they have about everybody who's 7'4", 7'5", and tall and sometimes skinny, which is health and feet and all that? Is that the only concern that there is? I mean, have you found anyone who's like, I think he's just going to be good, or just like, I'm kind of lukewarm on Victor? There's nobody like that, right?
There's nobody like that. He is one of the best prospects we've ever seen. Every person that you talk to feels the same way. You're just walking around the gym after those G League Ignite games, you could see the smiles on the faces of these really bad teams. They were like, oh my God, this is an easy one. Like at some point, like halfway through the game, usually I sit there, I'm taking really meticulous notes on my laptop. I'm locked in. I'm, every possession I'm evaluating. At some point, I close the laptop and I'm like, there's nothing else to see here. Let me just enjoy the show. I mean, it's so much fun.
And they love easy ones because easy ones are the ones that are risk-free from a job security standpoint, from a public perception standpoint. Like if something bad happens to Wembanyama in 5 years, no one is ever going to criticize you for picking him first. And I remember when the Hawks did the Luka Trae trade, where they traded down out of the Luka pick and got the Cam Reddish pick, the pick that became Cam Reddish, who was a lottery pick from Dallas. I remember saying the next day, like, I almost admire the guts that Travis Schlenk, and I think the ownership of the Hawks was involved in that too, heavily wanted Trae, because you can get fired for passing on Luka Doncic. That can get you fired. You never get fired for just sitting there and taking Luka Doncic. That's like an easy one. You never get fired for that. And I remember saying at the time, let's just see how the trade plays out, because they moved down a couple of slots. They got a player we all agree is good. I think Trae has made an all-NBA team already. And let's see where this other pick ends up and who they use it on. Well, it ended up on number 10, and it ended up on Cam Reddish, who is on his third team in a year and a half, and, put up some empty numbers last night for the Portland, tarmac team, the tarmac remains of the Blazers. And Travis Slank stepped down. Slash was pushed out. Slash is a fake advisor now for the Hawks, and they are in disarray. They fired their coach out of not nowhere, because there had been rumblings about the Nate McMillan-Trae relationship since the mysterious miss shoot around and the communication gaps that existed there. And, but I think a lot of people within that team, players, coaches, staff, were blindsided by 23 games to go at the end of the All-Star break. We're pulling the trigger now on this. And I think Quin Snyder would be a really interesting hire for them. We could talk about that later, but like, safe choices. People like safe choices. People don't like Durant Odin. Durant Odin's a risky one. That's a risky one. John Hollinger, our old colleague, wrote a piece this week about and I don't follow this like you do, and he does, about how there's suddenly a huge gap between perception of Wembanyama and Scoot and then everybody else in the draft. That wasn't the case at the beginning of the season. This was the draft. It's like, oh, if we get like the 6th pick or the 4th pick or the 3rd pick, the Thompson twins, this and that, like, we're all going to be, obviously we all want 1 or 2, but those are all going to be really good players. Do you agree? Have you heard the same, or is this still like a really good draft, 1 to whatever?
I disagree. I mean, I think that a year ago, people looked at it as, really like a 2-player draft. It was Victor and then Scoot, and then a big gap after that. And I don't think anything has really changed. I mean, there were a lot of questions in my mind a year ago about, who's the number 1 prospect in college, that's a really weird question to ask. You don't normally by now, and so I think that some of the guys in the mid lottery are confusing, and they're not all having the kind of year that you would want. And then this Brandon Miller situation in Alabama is a complete mess, but that's normal, honestly. Like, I feel like every draft is like that.
All right, let's talk about how the draft is shaping up. We know who the bottom 4 teams are going to be. There's like a 10-game gap between them and everybody else. Houston, San Antonio, who's lost 15 games in a row. I mean, it's hard to lose 15 games in a row in the NBA. Charlotte and Detroit, who lost Cade Cunningham very early in the season, barely played. Those teams are all 13-45, 14-46. No one can catch them. Like, there is no species of tanking that exists for pick a team that's above them in the standings. They are uncatchable. Those are going to be the 4 worst teams in the league. The only suspense is which one of them will be 4th and have slightly less chance of getting the number 1 pick. The first 3 all have a 14% chance of getting the number 1 pick. I do think it will be interesting to see, and the Blazers tarmac experience kind of alerted people to this. Like, 5 is very much in reach for a whole bunch of teams if Orlando and Indiana, who are currently tied in the loss column for that 5 spot, continue to try to win. And Orlando, by all accounts, is going to continue to try to win. They escaped the Pistons, or the Pistons escaped with a loss. I'm not sure which is the appropriate way to frame it last night. You look at a team like the Bulls, who are 26-33. They're like a fake injury and a losing streak away from having a much better chance of keeping their top 4 protected pick that they owe the Magic than I think people realize. And I just think there could be some jostling for that. I mean, you look at that 5th spot, you have a 10.5% chance of the number 1 pick and a 10.5% chance at the number 2 pick and a 10.5% chance at 3 and 4. You have like a 42% chance at a top 4 pick. That's a valuable slot, but we all know who the big 4 are. And I asked you as a thought exercise, and I did the same, to rank if you could be the GM of one of them starting now, or of any of them starting now, with all the assets that they have, with the players that they have, with the contracts that they have, starting from this day forward, going into this lottery. So you don't know where you're going to finish. You could finish 1, you could finish 2, you could get Wembanyama, you could get a Thompson twin, you could get lucky, you could get unlucky, you could pick 7th. Of Detroit, Charlotte, Houston, San Antonio, I will let you go first. Who is the one of those 4 that you would most like to be the GM of?
Yes. So first of all, I mean, it's a complicated question because there's so many factors that go into this, into like how attractive a situation is for an NBA team. And a lot of it is out of their control. You know, you look at ownership, you look at location, you look at their history, you look at how much can you sell agents and players and what you've done in the past and what can you build in the future. But for me, looking at those 4 teams, I think you need to look at San Antonio first when you blend all those things together. You know, I think if you went to Victor Wembanyama's camp right now and you gave them truth serum and you said, pick your ideal landing spot from those 4, I'm sure it would be the Spurs over those other teams, you know, especially if, you know, the other kind of attractive situations, you know, the Torontos and Oklahoma City, that doesn't look like it's realistic, you know, as things currently stand. But like you said, it's close there between Orlando, you know, at have 35 losses and Toronto have 31, you know, like that's not a big gap. Toronto is would be picking 12th right now, you know, like obviously we don't know what they're playing and all that. So, but you know, going back to the Spurs, I really like what they're building. I think Jeremy Sohan is an absolute stud. You know, Schmitz was super high on him, and he absolutely nailed that one. He's going to be so good. You know, just seeing him in the Rising Stars, and I did this rookie power rankings thing before the Rising Stars, and I watched him kind of unleashed in this, you know, tankathon situation that they're currently in, where they're letting him play point guard, and he's got all this freedom to do whatever he wants.
And by the way, he only plays every other game. Like they don't play. It's like every Spurs game. It's like, who's out now? This guy's out. That guy's out. They're starting up like Bates.
He missed some time. Yeah, he had a back injury or whatever. But I mean, he's a really, really exciting talent to me. And then he's got an incredible personality on top of that. He's the kind of guy that you want in your organization. He's someone that you want to build around. And then you got, you know, Keldon Johnson, Devin Vassell, Malachi Branham. There's some interesting wings, you know. And so like you get Victor, and then, you know, a point guard to go along with that. Obviously it's, you know, easier said than done, but you've got something pretty interesting brewing. And they've got this culture of, you know, having won not that long ago. And you know, you're in Texas, there's no income tax, whatever, you know, they got some things, pretty nice weather. You've got some things going for them. It's not going to be the most attractive of a free agent destination. I think Houston, probably of the 4, is maybe the most attractive. And then 2, I go Detroit from
Well, hold on. Let me stop you on Spurs.
Okay. Go for it.
So if you could guarantee me now that I'm the Spurs and I get one of the first 2 picks, I don't even need to get number 1. I think they would vault to number 1 on my rankings.
Right. Well, Scoot is a great fit there too. So either one of them is amazing for San Antonio.
Now, I only have a 27.4% chance of getting one of the first 2 picks currently where I am now in the standings. And if I keep losing every single game, that will stay what my odds are. So I can't in ranking them today bank on a 27.5% chance. So I had the Spurs 3rd on my list.
Right.
And you mentioned the free agent destination thing. Houston has that advantage over them. I think Houston has the one player of all the current young players that has the best chance of being like a star. And that's Jalen Green. And I know everyone's like off of Jalen Green. He's had a super disappointing second year. That place is a freaking tire fire. And poor Steven Silas, I think, is going to probably not be the coach next year. He seems like he's going to be the fall guy for they're basically playing a college team every single night. Totally disorganized. He's shooting. Jalen Green's shooting is been disappointing. His defense has been disappointing. I still think the potential of popping into a star is higher for him than for Vassell or Sohan or Branham. In Detroit, I had above San Antonio. I'm not going to say where yet, just because I feel like in Cunningham, they have, of all of these guys, the closest thing currently to a surefire all-star player who I feel like his game translates to real competitive high-level NBA basketball now if he's healthy. And I've heard the shin rehab stuff is going really well for him, and their expectations are for him to be fine. But on San Antonio, I love Vassell. Keldon Johnson, I is fine. Like, it's fine. I'm not as high on Keldon Johnson as a lot of people are. His contract, though, that thing declines. He's making $17.5 million in 26-27. That's going to be a really good contract. Sohan, I love. I love Sohan. I'm all in on Sohan. He does everything I like about. He passes, he cuts. He's a good defensive player. He's got a little ISO post up bully ball to him against size mismatches that he's been able to show. Tell me about Branham, because Branham has had a really nice last month. Has just a gorgeous old school mid range game. Starting to shoot the three a little better. What was the book on him? He's a 6'5" kind of combo guard. They're playing him at the point sometimes now with Trae Jones, whatever Trae Jones's absence has been lately. I can't even remember. What was the book on Branham coming out? Because he has outperformed his draft slot considerably and looks more like a potential core player for them than I thought he would be at this time of year.
So he wasn't really considered like a one and done guy coming into the year. I think he was, he was a 4-star recruit. I think he was ranked around 30 or something like that, like in his high school class. He didn't light the world on fire to start the season at Ohio State. He was coming off the bench and and then he was playing this complementary role. But as the year moved on and they got into Big Ten play, he became the guy for them. He was playing 36 to 38 minutes. He had a phenomenal game in the NCAA tournament against Villanova. They ran their entire offense through him. And that's very rare for a freshman, especially a guy who, isn't this 5-star recruit, McDonald's All-American, who everybody was really excited about from day one. So a little bit similar to the season that he's having now. He got off to a slow start in San Antonio. But then you look at him like the month of February, I just looked at this, 19 points a game, 41% for three, 59 for two. The flashes are just really, really high level. This guy, he's a hooper. I mean, he's not really he's not an athlete. He doesn't have the best body that you'll find. I remember watching him. He did a pro day. It was like a 1-on-0 in Chicago. And it was probably the most underwhelming from all the pro days because it was very low energy and he didn't make shots. He looked kind of scared. And I remember talking to all these gyms. They're like, man, this is a bad look. I'm like, dude, this is not a pro day guy. This is a 5-on-5 player. Put him in a gym with, he should be playing in the combine because that's where people are going to see his value. I mean, this guy is built for the modern NBA. He can go get his own shot. He's tremendous in the mid-range. He's got all this dynamic shot-making ability, but he can also, he could do stuff inside the arc too. And he's super young on top of that. And, 6'10" wingspan, so he can guard threes, but he's got guard skills. I think the guy is tremendous.
Yeah, I've really liked what I've seen. He has a weird kind of start and stop rhythm to his game, which, that can cut both ways. Like the ability to change pace between dribbles is really important. He can do the thing where he kind of gets his defender on his hip and keeps probing. On the other hand, he sometimes I want him to go a little faster. Like it's very, very slow and you want a little more oomph. And that's where the athleticism comes in. And I'm not sure, it can take time for teammates to get used to that kind of rhythm from a guy who has the ball a lot to know when to move and when to flare out for three and when to cut. Sohan, the same thing. Sohan at the beginning of the year was just cutting all over the place, cutting in the way, screwing up their spacing, but that's fine. That's like young player stuff. All of these guys, I think, are going to be could be very good complementary players. Vassell has a chance to be like an A++. I mean, he's averaging 20 a game this season, shooting 40% from three and taking tough shots and making them. So he has maybe a ceiling that's even higher than that. but they are more in search of the sort of straw that stirs the drink player, I think, than some of these other teams. And that's when, if you plop Wembanyama or Scoot into this, they rocket, not up the league yet, but their long-term trajectory rockets up. And by the way, sneaky amount of draft equity. Like, I think we know about the Hawks pick. They have a Charlotte pick that came in the DeJounte Murray trade. That's okay. It's like lottery protected, so they won't get it for a while. They have the Raptors pick 1 to 6 protected in 2024, 2025, 2026 from Pirtle. Probably get that next year. The Raptors, I think, have signaled they want to continue to be pretty good. That could be an okay pick. Hawks unprotected 2025. Hawks unprotected swap 2026. Hawks unprotected 2027. Chicago top 10 protected starting in 2025, and then top 8 from DeRozan. That could be an okay pick. Boston top 1 protected swap rights all the way out in 2028. They have more stuff. They're not on the like when teams, people start listing all the teams who own all the extra picks. It's like Utah, Oklahoma City, Houston, Brooklyn. Now, like, they have a sneaky amount of stuff. I just don't know, like, what of their current players, we'll see who they get in the draft, has like star potential. But I don't mind you ranking them number 1, and I think if they get lucky in the lottery, they would potentially be number 1 of these teams. They have interesting stuff going on.
Competence, I think, is an important word that you got to talk about, like when you're talking about the worst teams in the league. And it's a situation that, like, people know these guys at their front office and they trust them and they trust their situation. And a lot of agents, like, they don't like a lot of these, they don't want their players going to these places. And San Antonio, they're fine with it.
Interesting. They did well in the DeJounte Murray trade. I keep going back to the Hawks because they've been in the news, obviously, this week. If Quin Snyder gets that job, that's going to be really interesting, because someone needs to go in there and deal with the Trae Young situation. Like, he's got to move off the ball a little bit. Like, you can't trade all this stuff for DeJounte Murray and just have him spotting up around Trae Young, pick and rolls, just waiting for his turn when Trae Young decides to pass. You've got to get someone who makes him buy into that, to setting screens a little bit, to not being the worst defensive player in the entire league. And Quin Snyder had a really interesting tenure in Utah, where he started off in like this beautiful machine of like equal opportunity offense, the ball's moving all around. Joe Ingles has it, then this guy has it. And the longer he stayed there, the more it became a more simple offense built around Donovan Mitchell pick and rolls than anything else. And I'd just be interested to see what he goes in there and does if he gets that job. I think he's an amazing coach. Like, if they can hire Quin Snyder, they should absolutely hire Quin Snyder. He would be amazing. He brings accountability. He brings gravitas. He brings experience. Strategically, he is like one of these maniac geniuses that you will have to have in your team. That situation is, it just hasn't been great since they made the conference finals 2 years ago. Their current starting 5 has actually been really good all year, but they've got guys in and out of the lineup. And now that's a good transition into Detroit, actually, because they made a trade with the Pistons to get Sadiq Bey. You had Pistons number 2 of these four teams. I think we're both going to have the same one in last, but to sell me on Detroit at number 2.
I just look at what they have in terms of the high-end talent. I like the Pistons the most from those 4. I think Jaden Ivey is going to be a star. Just the strides that he's made this year with his pull-up jumper. I mean, so impressive. He made 5 threes yesterday. I mean, that was considered, the weakness in his game going in. And because, he's an incredible athlete. I mean, you just can't stay in front of him. He gets anywhere he wants on the floor. He doesn't really know how to finish right now. That's the next step in his development. But if you have a guy that other teams cannot stay in front of, I mean, that just makes everything so much easier. You pair him with Cade Cunningham and with Jalen Duren, who I think is an absolute stud, also the youngest player in the league, has, huge potential defensively, great hands, great finisher, shows you some flashes of passing ability, and so you have a really impressive core. And so you have a lot to build around there. I'm not sure if, again, free agents want to go there and all that, but like, I think they've done a really, really good job, in the draft here, the last, especially last year, getting Ivy and Duren. In my opinion, both, they went lower than they should have went.
Lukewarm take. I had Detroit number one out of these four teams, which is lukewarm because free agents are not going to go there, or you'll get the winner's curse free agents. You'll get the free agents that you have to overpay for, and maybe their deals don't age well. Like, why is Marvin Bagley making $12 million a year? I have absolutely no idea. No one has any idea why they paid Marvin Bagley that contract. He never plays. He's reportedly coming back soon. His fit on this team is like, I guess he just has to play the four all the time now because they just got another center in James Wiseman. But anyway, I had them, and they have their net -1 first round pick. They owe a pick, I think, to New York. And so they don't have this bounty of extra stuff to go out and get theoretical star X in 3 years. I still have the number one because I have Cade, I have Ivy, and I have Duren. And I have the same odds right now as these other teams of getting Wembanyama or Scoot. Right now, today, February 24th, that 27.5% chance plus that core, I'm ranking them number one, despite the lack of the picks. Ivy, the first 2 months of the season, as someone who doesn't watch college basketball much, I was so disappointed in Jaden Ivey. I was like, this is the guy that there's been all this. He's just out of control. He's taking horrible shots. He's flying around the court. His turnovers are just awful. The last 2 months, he has calmed down, playing at a better pace. His pull-up looks good from 2 and 3. He's got a floater. He's got a little like go to his left leaning floater that he draws fouls on all the time. He looks now like the player that everyone told me he was. Duren, go ahead.
Jaden Ivey, you're 6'4", you've long arms, you've got an incredible body, you're one of the best athletes in the NBA. You can't be the worst defender in the NBA. Bend your knees, try, because like that's always been the knock on him, is like, is he going to guard? Like that was the question at Purdue. And that's the one disappointment that I have with him, is that like the lack of intensity I get. Like they're trying to lose every game. Nobody cares, but that's the one thing that I want to see him work on next year.
Totally agree. He runs into picks. He gets lost in rotation. You can see him like swiveling around, like in mid rotation, like, where am I supposed to go? The corner of the wing. This is a big player development summer for the Pistons and a big player development test for the Pistons and their coaching staff. And because I think they need to get him in the lab and not work on the cool stuff. They need to work on like the passing reads and slowing down and the nitty-gritty of defense with him. Duren is already number 6 in offensive rebounding in the league. He has a second and a third jump that like you blink and he's already jumped 4 times. Defensively, he's going to be fine. He has all the tools. He's going to be quick enough to switch, which is what they want him to do eventually. He can drop. He can protect the rim. He's shown a little bit of a face-up game every now and then when he gets a chance. Those three, and Cade, I'm a Cade believer. I just remain skeptical of this Isaiah Stewart power forward thing. I just don't know that he's going to be dynamic enough on offense to make that work with Duren at the 5 and him at the 4. Or Wiseman at the 5 and him at the 4. I guess I'm skeptical of that. Their offense makes more sense when Bogdanovich or Livers, who's a pretty good player, is at the 4. I think that's a question mark for me of how do they fill that spot, which is why like the Sadiq Bey for James Wiseman was an interesting thing for them. I think Sadiq Bey is pretty good. I was disappointed with his play this year. His shooting's been His defense has been He hasn't really made the kind of like 3 and D and drive off the catch advancements that I wanted to see. I don't know that I want James Wiseman over him, though. I thought that was an interesting trade. What did you think of that?
I had heard that he was asking for insane money this upcoming summer, that the feeling was that he was going to need like a DeAndre Hunter type contract in order to keep him. And so if that's the case, like to me, like he's closer to doing like a mid-level guy than like $20+ million per year. And so I don't know, do you fight it out in restricted free agency and say, hey, go get an offer sheet, whatever? Nobody's going to offer him that kind of money.
That's what restricted free agency is for. That's why you have it. That's why the players hate it and fight against it in the CBA, as they should.
Yeah, I mean, I think sometimes when you're a team in that situation, you pick and choose your battles, especially when his agent represents Cade Cunningham, and so like sometimes you say, okay, we'll help you guys out this time. We'll trade him. He'll get paid. Help us out on the next one. And I don't know for a fact that that's what happened, but I'm guessing that had something to do with it.
What is Killian Hayes going to be? There was like a month in December or something when he started making some shots and was like, all right, Killian Hayes. It's like maybe we all wrote him off too soon. I think like defensively, he really fights. He's got good hands. He's got a great body type. He can get where he wants to go in the mid-range, at least on offense. Getting to the rim and shooting threes is a different story. Then that kind of faded. He was coming off the bench for a second. Now he's back starting again. They're bringing Burks off the bench instead of starting him because it's full on tank time. He's still shooting 37%, 31% on threes, 41% on twos. I think he's only 21. I remember the concern coming out of the draft among the Hayes skeptics was the Harden comparisons, all that. Like, he doesn't have the explosiveness and the burst and the ability to get to the rim that James had, or whatever lead ball handler you want to compare him to. And I that has borne out to me. What is he? Is he a core player for? I mean, Ivy and Cunningham, I've obviously just way vaulted over him in the Pistons long-term hierarchy. What is he going to be?
So I was the Killian Hayes hater in the draft. If you remember, I came on the podcast and I talked about why I thought the German league was the most overrated in Europe, and why he's like picking on all these guys that he's doing things over there that's not realistic. And so I had him ranked as like a mid-first guy. And I was very surprised when they drafted him where they did. But actually going through watching some Pistons games here lately, I was like, you know what? Killian Hayes is like, I mean, he's probably a backup, but like he's 6'5", he's 21 years old. He's got a really good feel for the game, and he's guarding, so that's a pretty good place to start. So I actually came away from that watching experience being like, you know what? Killian Hayes, if he were like in a more competitive situation, people might look at him as like a guy that's kind of interesting.
I think he's going to be kind of interesting. I just don't know how does he start anymore for them with Ivy and
no, he doesn't need to start. He's a very good backup, I mean, you just got to forget about where you drafted him and just say, like, now we've got this guy under contract. He's the same age as most of our other young players, and like, let's roll with it, because he's a super high character guy and he's a very hard worker. And so I think that you just, he's not going to be what you thought he was where you drafted him, but that doesn't matter because you have so many other high picks since then. It's going to be fine. You're not going to get every single draft pick right.
Speaking of, you have to forget where you drafted him. They have James Wiseman on their team now, and they really went after James Wiseman. Like, I've heard the same stuff about what contract Saddiq Bey wants. $20 million for Saddiq Bey, that's a lot. It's a lot of money for a guy who maybe you think is a good reserve when your team gets good. I mean, I think that's what you have to conclude the Pistons thought is like, we don't think this guy's a long-term starter for us. We used to talked him up like that. Don't think about it anymore. Because if you did think he was your long-term tweener forward, 3-and-D, 18 a game, 38% from three, switch across all those, but you thought he was that player, you wouldn't trade him. You'd keep him and pay him what DeAndre Hunter makes or whatever comp you want to use. Instead, they have Wiseman, who Duran's already better than him, and long-term, I would much rather have Duran. Wiseman will show you some stuff every once in a while, but he's far away. I just thought that was an interesting move. And again, I'm ranking them one now just because we don't know how the lottery is going to unfold, and they have the same odds as Houston, San Antonio. Right now, Charlotte's actually in the fourth best odds. I assume now we both had Houston. Where did you? I had Houston. I had Houston second actually over the Spurs. As of today, and I can't believe I'm saying that because they have been just utterly unwatchable for most of the year. But I think Green has the perimeter superstar potential. Şengün is the best player on the team already. Şengün's good. I am a sucker for Tari Eason. I love everything about Tari Eason. They will get free agents there. In fact, my fear is that they will get the wrong free agents there in some irrational exuberance / panic about, holy shit, we owe the Thunder our pick, top 4 protected, not just in 2024, but in 2026, because James Harden on his way out the door made us trade for Russell Westbrook, and we did it, and we gave up Chris Paul in these picks. We have to get good. Maybe we should bring James Harden back. That seems like a horrible idea, but maybe we'll do it. But they will get people there. They control all the Brooklyn Nets draft picks from 2024 to 2027 via picks and swaps. That's a good, I think, investment to be, although the Nets have recovered well, and I think are signaling we're going to try and be good. It's been a disaster on the floor. They have no organizing principle on offense unless the ball is in Şengün's hands, in which case things start to make a little bit more sense. And can they just give him the ball more? I don't understand why. It's been almost a relief that Kevin Porter Jr. has been injured, because he just dribbles all the time, and he's shot it pretty well. He's averaging 19, 6, and 6. He was one of the best catch and shoot three-point shooters in the league last year. You can't take catch and shoot threes if you're dribbling all the time. But anyway, between Şengün and Green and the picks, I actually almost had them number 1, despite the fact that they've just been so hard to watch. I feel like a crazy person for being like still having some optimism about them.
I mean, if you're being offered the GM job, like there is some very attractive components to that job. It's the most attractive location of the 4 franchises we're talking about. Free agents would actually want to play there. It's a big city, no income tax. I was surprised that you talked about Jalen Green as like the most. Şengün to me is the one that I'm most excited about.
I should have led with. I've talked about Şengün a lot on this podcast. Yeah. I am super high on Şengün. He's been the best player on the team by far. I guess I'm just thinking it feels like you always need a perimeter guy who can get you 25 and 6. And maybe you don't if Şengün is I don't know what Şengün is going to be, but Şengün's really, really good.
Yeah, I'm just, like you, I'm worried about Jalen Green, to be honest with you, because I just haven't seen any improvement with his decision making and his defense since he entered the league. You want to see guys.
He's gotten worse. He's gotten worse.
Exactly. And so and that's where, I'm worried about the trajectory that he's on. But if you're if you get the GM job tomorrow, you come in there, you fire the coach, you get rid of Kevin Porter, and you need to clean out.
Hold on, just stop for a second. You're out of the Kevin Porter business. If you're Jonathan Givony GM, you're
non-guaranteed contract, right? Just cut him. That's it. And you're sending a signal to the league. We're going to do things differently from here on out. When you talk to people around the NBA about Houston, you just don't hear good things about their culture, about their locker room.
You hear it's a circus. It's like a complete circus.
You talk to, people that are on that team. They're like, we are a mess, And so do people want to work with this organization, But you could change that fairly quickly, I would think, if you come in and you get rid of the bad apples and you change the coaching staff, and all of a sudden you're Houston. You're the 3rd biggest city in America. There's a history here of you actually being good. Like you said, you have picks, you have cap room, there are some things to work with. Şengün is a very interesting guy to build around. And, Jalen Green is, even if it's a 6-man, like he's pretty freaking dynamic and explosive, and his scoring instincts are incredible. So there's some things to work with Houston for sure.
This is a big summer for Rafael Stone and that front office, because this is 3 straight years of being terrible. And they don't seem to be getting as much of the Philly, Oklahoma City pearl clutching about, oh my God, they're so bad, where they're trying to do the process. This is so bad for the NBA. Nobody seems to care that Houston is on their 3rd straight year of being terrible. They do have all this cap space. They just need, whether it's through a coaching staff, whether it's signing some mid-career veterans who add some kind of organization to their team, they just can't play this way another season. They can't be this sort of just random, awful on defense. I mean, awful transition defense, half-court defense. They have no idea what they're doing. And I understand they're super young. Young teams don't know what they're doing. But I don't know if it's the players, the coaches, all of it. They're not getting better. They're getting worse. And free agency or whatever aside, they need to show progress as in actual basketball skills and not just dunks and cool highlights. It's a big summer. It's a big summer in that regard. I feel like I'm beginning to be a little bit lonely, not being super duper nervous about Jabari Smith Jr. I've heard the word bust thrown around already about him. And I get why. 12.7 rebounds, 39% shooting, 30% from 3. That was supposed to be the skill right away, right? Everything else would come later. The jump shot would come now. I don't know. Maybe I'm watching the wrong games. I can't watch every Houston game. I don't find myself super worried about him. I actually think he might be pretty good. Where are you on him midway through, 2/3 of the way through year 1?
So I just did this, rookie power rankings, and I was like, Jabari Smith, I need to figure out. And so I watched full games, and I was like, show me the best games that he's played this year, and let me see him when he's playing at his absolute best. And I came away very worried about Jabari Smith.
Really? Okay, yeah. Tell me why.
I don't know his feel for the game. It just isn't there, and he's so upright. He's so hunched over. What is he? Is he?
What is he? Is a fair question.
He's a spot up shooter who plays really hard on defense. That's kind of, and so where is the pathway to being a star? I mean, we thought that he was going to be this nuclear shooter who's just running off screens and handling it in the open floor and pulling up for threes, and maybe we'll still get that at some point, because if that is really, really exciting. But he hasn't made shots all year, and he's bad inside the arc, and you want to squint and be encouraged by his defense. But I'm like, man, he makes a lot of mistakes there too. I mean, he's still young, so he'll figure that out. And again, it's a dumpster fire of a team, so it's hard because when you're not getting those easy looks, those easy baskets, it's hard to get going. And then he starts pressing, he's taking bad shots, and he sees Kevin Porter taking horrible shots and Jalen Green, and it's depressing, I'm sure. He's putting on this pressure on himself. He sees Paolo having this great year, and I mean Keegan Murray and Mathurin, and so I'm sure that he is a very, very high character guy. And he is the youngest of, the 3 guys that win in the top 3. So you have to give him time. But, patience is not a virtue for me. I'm Israeli, you usually see me drive. But I don't, it's just, nothing that I saw, led me to be I got to put this guy in my top 10, and he's going to figure it out. But listen, I mean, I could change my mind in a month from now. I mean, that's what we do, right?
I'm a very picky driver, very demanding, high standards as a driver. When you are on the road, we are all part of a shared civilization. We're all counting on each other. We're all counting on each other to follow the rules. Don't just stop in the middle of an intersection where you're supposed to keep going and start waving people in. That's not what you're supposed to do. drive safely, but like when the light turns green, particularly if it's a light that's got a big line and like a limited green arrow, you got to go. Like, go. Okay, we're all counting on
You're
you.
a honker.
No, I don't honk because honking. I think I'm scarred from living in New York for 20 years. I just hate the sound of honking and car alarms and all of it. So I will just get cranky in my car and silently cranky and grumbling. But like, you got to go, man. Like, we're all part of a civilization. And don't you dare text. Don't text. And in parking lots, moving to the suburbs has taught me parking lots are like the most dangerous places in the world, man. Parking lots, I'm more worried about people getting run over in parking lots than I am like anywhere. People are just backing out. Anyway, it's a good transition into the Hornets, actually, just disasters and accidents. But about on Houston, on Smith. So I guess what I'm betting on is the character, the defense, the competitiveness, because he gets fired up in ways that I like. The shooting, most guys who have reputations as shooters and they struggle early, they find their shot. They become shooters. And I just can't imagine being a 19-year-old off-ball rookie trying to like get the ball on this team and do stuff with it. And I've seen enough like pump and go, lefty hesitation dribble. Like there's enough. It's like once every 2 games is not a lot, but there's stuff in there under the hood that if people are selling their Jabari Smith Jr. stock already and calling him a bust, I'm going to buy it up. I'm not saying he's going to be a star. Obviously, like the Paolo Jabari fork in the road, what if was a grand slam home run for the Magic and a big strikeout for Houston. Not that they could have done much about it. But I still like what I see there. They just need someone to organize their team. And maybe it's as simple as just not having both Porter and Green, not having both of them. Maybe it's as simple as what you're saying is just like move on from Kevin Porter and get a traditional point guard, get someone who can just get this team organized. Do we really need to talk about Charlotte?
He's going to be fine. You're right. But like, what do you do in like Şengün and him are the same position? No, like, can they play together? Like, is Jabari a 5? Is Şengün a 5? Like who guards the 5s?
Şengün. Well, maybe you mess around with the matchups. Like maybe it just depends what kind of 5 you're dealing with. And yeah, Şengün's got to get stronger. He's got to get better defensively. He's young and he's not a leaper and not a rim protector in the way you want, not like Duren is going to be. But the passing and the post game and the ability to initiate the offense is very, very rare. And the post game is like a little nastier, a little meaner, and a little more physical than you think it's going to be for a second-year player who's a passer, who's a pass-first player. He's kind of nasty in the post. He's got that little push shot. He's the new Rashawn Holmes. Remember Rashawn Holmes' push shots seem to go in every single time. That's Şengün now. Charlotte, I just don't have a lot to say. It's just a disaster. And of all these teams, nobody needs to get lucky in the lottery more than Charlotte. I don't need to go through like 20 years of bad draft picks and just from Michael Kidd Gilchrist to James Bouknight, who has a whole slew of off-court stuff going on and never plays. Mark Williams is pretty good. Like what I've seen from Mark Williams. LaMelo Ball's awesome. I haven't loved LaMelo Ball's game this year, though. All the coaches there love LaMelo Ball. They say he's unselfish and works really hard and comes with a positive attitude. And they've all and it's a crusty old school staff and they all love him. So that means something to me. And he's really, really good. And you can't teach the height and the passing. I just feel like he's been a little bit of a ball hog this year, a little bit of a shot, a little bit of a hoggy shooter. PJ Washington is pretty good. Didn't get the Jalen McDaniels trade. Just didn't get it. Like, why would I don't understand. They traded Jalen McDaniels for like a second-round pick. I don't get it. And the rationale is, well, I've had to choose between Jalen McDaniels and PJ Washington in free agency. I'm like, why? What am I up against the freaking tax next year? I'm not. Why do I have to choose between 2 good young players? I'm the Charlotte Hornets. I should want all the good young players. I don't get it. I don't have a lot of draft picks coming in. I get the Nuggets pick this season. Whoop-de-doo. I don't know. It's not great.
I think LaMelo is a sleeping giant. I think that he's one of the most talented young guards in the NBA. But I have been a little bit disappointed, like you, that they haven't pushed him to work on his deficiencies the way that I'd hoped. I tune in once in a while because I just love watching him play. To me, he's like one of the most fun guys to watch in the NBA. And he's still coasting and, showing up every other game. His intensity isn't there. And I get it. It's hard, like when you're such a bad team, but I think LaMelo, surrounded with the right pieces and the right coaching staff and all that, being pushed the right way, LaMelo is, he's a top 20 player in the NBA.
I hope nobody unearths this clip. It must have been a year and a half ago. It was a long time ago, in my defense. It was like maybe 2 years ago. On NBA Today, they did a horrible thing where they make you do an either or. And they put you on the spot and you have to pick. And it was, all right, they asked all of us, who do you want for the next 10 years, LaMelo Ball or John Morant? And I love John Morant. Love John Morant. Love the way he leads. Love the way he plays. And I sat there anguished on the screen. I did this. Why are you guys doing this to me? And then I looked and I said, I don't feel good about it. I love John Morant. But 6'8" with the passing and the shooting, I think I'm going to take LaMelo Ball. And I think 3 out of 4 or 2 out of 4 of us took LaMelo. Obviously, looks like a horrible take in retrospect. Horrible. I got a text from I got some texts from people who are in Jaws circle that like, you're insane. You better hope he never sees this that on TV. I got some texts from very, very good players. One of them was a WNBA player who was like, I kind of agree with you. It's LaMelo. I mean, like, that's how high I am on just the size. It's the size, the ability to shoot off the dribble, and the ability to make any pass on the floor because of your size is so rare that I didn't think it was crazy 2 years ago to choose him over Morant. And I was super high on Morant already. It looks dumb in retrospect, but that's how much hope I had for him. I just don't know what's going on. It's just not a.
He's 21, there are players who are going to be, many players are going to be drafted in this year's draft that are older than LaMelo Ball, and they're just now starting their NBA career. So like LaMelo has time to figure it out, but like I want to see him taking the next jump, but like
he's just out there doing like, and it's hard to blame him because what is he supposed to do? Like Gordon Hayward plays half the games. Terry Rozier's shooting 41%. He's had a year. By the way, Ja's shooting percentage is kind of sneakily getting a little worrisome right now. He's down to 31% from 3, 49, I think, or maybe 51 from 2. It's not great. Neither here nor there. Charlotte's fourth, they're fourth, whatever. Tell me about Bronny James, because you did your 2024 mock draft today as well. As you can imagine, don't have my finger on the pulse of the Lithuanian kid who's number 1 in your 2024 mock draft. The headline, though, obviously was Bronny James, who, everyone's been wondering, is he going to be a second round pick? Is he going to get drafted? This is not 2 years ago. It's like, is he really going to be a serious NBA prospect because of the murmurings of, not murmurings, LeBron has said it, that he wants to play with his son. Now he's a lottery pick in your draft. Tell me how that happened and what the reaction you got from inside the league was about people who've been tracking him for all these years, like you, putting him that high.
I mean, first of all, the context of this draft. I mean, I love Bronny, and I think he's going to be really good, so I'll stand behind that. But you have to understand that this is the worst high school class we've seen in 20 years. And so the 2024 draft, trade all your picks right now, man, because it's really, really depressing.
It's too late. They're already traded.
Exactly. Half of them have been traded, but you still have this offseason, next year's deadline. So like maybe people would just give them away, because I wouldn't want to be drafting at the top of next year's draft next year, because like those guys, there's nice players, and so the way I ranked it, I was like, let's talk about floors, okay? And that's why, Matas Buzel is number one, 6'10" point guard, great feel for the game, can dribble, pass, and shoot, like really smart off the ball defensively, kind of like a Franz Wagner type, like
Sounds
not
great.
really.
Sounds great.
Great. Not what you normally, okay, but he's 185 pounds, and there's no guarantees that he's going to get there. That's the archetype that we're talking about. But, it's not what you expect to find normally at one. Usually the top of the draft, there's guys that it's Paolo, it's Chet, it's Anthony Edwards, it's LaMelo Ball. It's guys that you're like, these guys are going to be all-stars, and so it doesn't always work out that way. But the 20, and you start going down the list and you're like, man, this guy hasn't gotten any better in 12 months. This guy hasn't gotten any better in 18 months. And these are like the top 10 recruits. And so these guys, they're not growing, they're not evolving, they're not changing. And so the one guy that is improving every time I see him is Bronny. I've been watching him since he was a freshman in high school. He was short, he was skinny, he didn't have any skill back then. He wasn't even that athletic, to be honest with you. Every time I watch him, I'm like, holy cow, Bronny has made another jump. Now you see him, he's 6'4", he's chiseled, he's got like this Marcus Smart body, and he just like absolutely wrecks everybody on defense. And then on top of that, he's really made strides with his jumper. He's making like these deep pull-up threes now. He's a tremendous connector and teammate, and like he's a high floor guy. Maybe I made the comp to DeAnthony Melton. People are like, well, you don't take DeAnthony Melton at 10. So yeah, but if you redraft that draft, like DeAnthony Melton, is probably like a top 15 guy. And so like when you're picking from really bad options, I'll take Bronny and people are like, oh, well, you're accounting for the fact that you're going to get LeBron with Bronny. I think that had nothing to do with my decision. I think Bronny is really good. And so the reaction that I got, I was surprised. A lot of people from the NBA, they hit me. They're like, man, I like Bronny too. I was hoping that he would stay underrated. And that's the crazy part. Like the son of the most famous player in NBA history is underrated, and I think the big criticism people have, it's like, well, how could he be ranked 28th in his high school class, but he's 10th on your board? It's like, well, dude, I don't do those high school rankings. I mean, those guys, they get it wrong every year. We get it wrong every year. So I'm not going to be bound by the fact that just because he was ranked 35th 2 years ago, that's the hard part when you're making high school rankings. It's like they don't like dropping guys. A guy starts at 5th when he's a high school sophomore. They're not going to drop him to 45th. And so, which is, probably more realistic for where he should be. And, when Bronny, they had him at 50 and now he's kind of slowly creeping up. I guarantee you when the next rankings come out, everybody's going to have him top 15, top 20. I mean, he's got a McDonald's All-American invite. He's at the Nike Hoop Summit. Now, USA Basketball, they invited 10 guys, okay? 12 guys, excuse me. They don't mess around. They're not after hype. And so they invited him because they thought he can help them win the game at the Nike Hoop Summit. And that's what he's going to do in college. He's going to win you a lot of games. And he's exactly the position that people are looking for. Josh Hart got traded for a first-round pick. There's value in that type of player.
Marcus Smart was the 6th pick in the draft.
Exactly. I mean, Marcus Smart was a better scorer probably at that age, but Bronny has got a much better feel than Marcus Smart does. He's not this wild decision maker that Marcus was at that age, but the guy's a winner. So and I'll go to war with a guy like Bronny, and I'm projecting improvement here in the next 14 months. I think Bronny James, the trajectory that he's on, he's going to keep getting better and better and better. He's going to keep growing. His body's going to get bigger and bigger. He's going to get more explosive. He's got the best genes and he's got the best training. And so I've learned those are the guys that you bet on. It's the sons of the former NBA players. Their track record is just impeccable. And so I'll take a flyer on Bronny James. I mean, I think the guy's tremendous.
I think it's cool and not surprising that LeBron's son has never been like out there chucking and trying to do fancy stuff, that you're describing him as like a winner, glue guy, defender, good passer, good vision, all that. I think that's very fitting.
It
And
says a lot about LeBron, by the way, like that the
that's what I'm
way,
saying.
like it's hard to raise kids, especially imagine LeBron's situation, like where he's, so obviously LeBron and his wife, clearly they did an incredible job because like he is the best teammate, like he's picking guys up, like he's not about the hype. He's always making the right play. I mean, like he's just a really good, cool basketball player. And that's hard to develop, honestly.
Not breaking ground here, but the LeBron angle does make Ronnie's draft process very, very interesting. Because whoever you are, you give yourself a chance at LeBron at twilight, LeBron and Son playing together. You are the hottest ticket in the NBA immediately. LeBron, by the way, is currently averaging 30 points a game. He's still amazing. Do people try to trade up for that pick? Do the Lakers try to trade up for that pick? Who knows what the possibilities are? But that's a question for a different day. I thought that was really interesting. I gave you 2 quick questions to wrap the podcast on. Are you ready?
Sure.
Question 1. Forget the playoffs for a second. Next 20 games, rest of the regular season, who has the most at stake, or who's the most interesting to you? Who has the most at stake of the 30 teams?
I think it probably has to be the Lakers or the Warriors, but I'm going to go with the Lakers here, just because, Russ is gone. LeBron broke the record. The circus is over. It's no longer this cloud that's hovering over them. They need to feed into every game. And, they've built a pretty deep hole for themselves, like with, their record right now. And I was just looking at this earlier. They have like the 4th hardest schedule in the NBA still remaining. And you just wonder, how many games are you going to get out of LeBron and AD, and so, they've already played now with this trade. They had a great trade deadline, but they played most of their chips already, so like they finished the season in a disappointing way. You just wonder what this offseason is going to look like. Where do they turn to change their outlook going into next year?
Now, it's only been the Pelicans without Zion, and I think without CJ too, and the Warriors without Wiggins and Curry, but they've looked good. The revamped team has looked good. I think starting Beasley and Vanderbilt as the sort of 2 leftover starters has been smart and played out well. They're creeping up. I went off the beaten path a little bit and went Minnesota. 31-30, tenaciously clinging to a play-in spot. Traded all their picks for Gobert, obviously owe Utah an unprotected pick, and I can tell you they are for sure losing sleep over the possibility of like, what if we miss the playoffs? What if the lottery gods are cruel to us? What if? And then the Towns thing. They've been about 500 without Towns. It's been out for a while. Anthony Edwards has ascended to all-star status. It's his team. He can say all the politely as many times as he wants. It's our team. It's me and Carl's team. It's his team. It's Anthony Edwards' team. How does that fit work out? They have whenever he comes back, they'll have very little time to see how he looks again with Gobert before the playoffs, the play-in, the offseason, whatever it ends up being. I think they're under a lot of pressure to not right the ship, but to get the ship steering in some waters that are just not 500. Last question is, now include the playoffs. And obviously we don't know exactly who's going to make the playoffs in either conference. Which team has the most at stake in the playoffs?
I mean, a bunch of candidates here. I mean, I can't wait for the playoffs. I think it's going to be amazing. There's so many great storylines. You look at Phoenix and the Clippers and Miami and the Knicks, but probably number 1 on my list here is Philly, because what happens if Philly loses in the first round of the playoffs, or even if they make the conference semis and they end the season on kind of a disappointing note again? James Harden can opt out of his contract this summer. What does Embiid do if their season ends in disappointment and Harden is out the door? Where do they go from here?
You nailed it. My answer says Sixers/Clips, but I went Sixers. I just feel like all the discussion about Philadelphia has been off a little bit this season, at least in the national media. I understand the skepticism that they could ever beat Milwaukee or Boston in a playoff series. Believe me, I understand. I've seen James Harden in elimination games. I get it. I've seen Joel Embiid underperform in the playoffs. I get it. They are loaded for bear. Like, they have everything they need to take a real shot at one of those teams. And the other prong of it is exactly what you just said. I just don't think people have realized the downside of what could happen here. If they limp out with their tail between their legs again in the second round, or God forbid the first round, I'm assuming they're going to win their first round series. Maybe that's dumb of me, but if it's 4-1 Milwaukee and Harden is like, well, I just didn't get the ball, I shot one time in the second half, ball didn't find me, and he's a free agent and he can walk away. And I can tell you right now, pick a few teams that have a lot of draft picks and stuff to trade. They all are wondering exactly the question you just asked, the question I asked in my column today. What does Joel Embiid do in that case? But that's a story for another day. Jonathan Givony, you have your mock draft 2024 up. You have a big article about Wembanyama with Brian Windhorst up, which is super fascinating. What else we got coming next week? We got rookie power rankings right before the Rising Stars, the Ruffles Rising Stars sounds. Is it Ruffles Kia? Ruffles? No idea. Ruffles just sounds funny to me. Like the fact that we have to call welcome back to the Ruffles celebrity game sponsored by Ruffles. What else we got coming up from you?
Nothing next week. Thankfully, getting ready for conference tournaments, the NCAA tournament. It's all happening in March, and so we're watching the end of this conference play the season and just trying to figure out this draft, which it's going to be a work in progress for the next 4 months.
Well, your work is second to none. We're lucky to have you. Jonathan Givony, go on with the rest of your day. Thank you for giving us a little time.
Thanks, Zach.